Great feast we celebrate today. One of the Renaissance great artists, Raphael, painted a picture of the Transfiguration. It's about the size of this back wall, only standing upright. If you have a chance, one of the few occasions that I wish we did PowerPoint presentations or something was so I could show you this picture. When you have a chance, look it up when you get home, because it'll teach you a lot about the Transfiguration if you understand the picture correctly. After I preach on the Transfiguration, you'll be able to look at that image and understand it a little bit more. And before we talk about the Transfiguration, though, we have to put it into its context to understand why are we here. Why did Jesus do this thing on the mountain where he transfigured himself, where people who were dead came back and were presented with Jesus talking to him? What was this all about? Well, in Matthew 16, we have the scene where Jesus takes all of his disciples up to Caesarea Philippi, that podunk area where there's nothing except for that pagan temple where people used to throw babies into an underground cave, and where Jesus said, "Who do people say that I am?" He's asking for his disciples to identify him. Not for him to ask because he was concerned about what his public image was. Who are people saying that I am? Should I be nicer? Should I be meaner? Does this crowd want me to talk about this? He didn't care about any of that. What he wanted to know is, do his disciples, do his apostles know who he is? Because their proclamation of faith, their understanding of who he is going to be fundamental for what happens after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension. So, of course, Peter has a great proclamation where he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "It was not man, but God who revealed this to you, Peter. And upon this rock, I'll build my church." It's great, wonderful. A few days later, I think the scriptures say 6 days later, they are coming up this mountain, the Mount of Transfiguration. And here Jesus only takes Peter, James, and John. Now remember, they're coming off the coattails. Excuse me. Yeah. Nope, I skipped a step, an important step. So Jesus proclaims Peter proclaims that Jesus is Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus starts to say, "And the Son of Man must be handed over and given over to death, and he will suffer and die and be raised again." And Peter says, "What? Oh no, Lord, how can this be? Let this not be so." And the one about whom Jesus just said, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church," that one is now saying, "Jesus, don't let this happen. Don't let the will of God happen. We want you to stay with us." And Jesus says to Peter, "Peter, you are thinking as man does, not as God does." This almost in an instant, this flip, where Peter is proclaiming Jesus Christ, and he is the faithful foundation upon which the church will be built. And then in Jesus' next breath, where he's talking about his death, Peter's like, no, hold on. No, that's not right. We're going to do it my way. I believe you're the Son of God, but we're going to do it my way. Peter's faith is not where it needs to be, and Jesus sees this. So, several days later, he takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain, and there he is transfigured. It says transfigured, but really it's revealing Jesus for who he really is, right? So it's really more of a revelation of who he is. It's the revelation that we see in the book of Daniel, which was in the first reading. That Son of Man, to whom all of the dominion, all of the power, all of the principalities of the world are handed over to him, for him to have dominion forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. That Son of Man that we saw in the book of Daniel, Jesus now reveals himself to be. This is who I am. And Moses and Elijah are standing next to him to give credibility to him. Moses being the arbiter of the law and Elijah of the prophets, showing that Jesus not only is that Son of Man who is exalted in heaven, but also that he is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Everything that has been given in revelation to humanity throughout the Old Testament culminates and finds its perfection in Jesus Christ. And his apostles, Peter, James, and John, specifically, these three, his favorites. We all know we have favorites, right? His favorites are with him and see this. They experience it. And not only that, as if Jesus' transfiguration wasn't enough and Moses and Elijah being there weren't enough, God the Father himself speaks. And he says, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Remember what we heard in the second reading from Peter's letter. Peter is referring back to this event when he says, "We ourselves heard the voice that came down from heaven while we were on the holy mountain." We can't go any farther into that reading or it's going to get too far ahead in the homily that I have planned here. But suffice it for now that Peter is referring back to this. And he's referring back to it now because what did Jesus say? He said, "Don't tell anybody about this yet. Tell people about it later, but not right now." We'll wonder why here in a second. Why not go ahead and tell everybody? Why not have everybody there on the mountain in the first place? So they come down, and when they come down to a commotion. All the rest of the disciples and the apostles are at the base of the mountain, and there's a man there with a child possessed with a demon, and he says to Jesus, "Jesus, please heal my son. Your apostles couldn't do anything about it, but maybe you can." And Jesus casts out the demon, and his apostles come to him quietly later, a little bit sheepishly, a little bit ashamed, embarrassed. "Why couldn't we do it?" And he said, "It was for the lack of your faith." The lack of faith. We've just gone on a roller coaster ride in the last few days here of the apostles showing a tremendous amount of faith and then doubt. And then up on the mountain, a huge amount of faith and then doubt again. Now, the reason that Jesus transfigured himself on the mountain was to give assurance to those most important of his apostles, Peter, James, and John, that though he may have died, what he said would happen really would. Don't worry, guys, I'm going to die. And I know you think that after somebody's dead, they can't do anything, but I can. I will rise again on the third day. Rest assured. You saw who I was. You know who I am. Peter, you proclaimed it before you saw it, then you saw it. And that's an important fact, too. If Peter had seen Jesus before he proclaimed who he was, it wouldn't have been credited to him as faith. Because seeing Jesus transfigured, the knowledge of who Jesus was would have cast out the act of faith that Peter made ahead of time. Does that make sense? I think we've talked about this before. Knowledge casts out faith. You can't have faith in something if you know it, right? Faith is the belief in what is not yet been revealed. You know it's there, you haven't seen it, but you know it's there. That's faith. If Jesus is like, ta-da, I'm the Son of Man, and then he said to Peter, James, and John, okay, who do people say that I am? And Peter said, well, obviously, ta-da, you're the Son of Man. It wouldn't have meant anything. Right? So Jesus is preserving Peter's ability to express his faith, while at the same time, after the fact, giving him the sure knowledge that the faith that he had, it was well placed. So that when the scandal of the cross happens, the guy that I have been following that I believed was God is dead. If Peter didn't have the faith and knowledge of Jesus' divinity, he would have despaired. He would have utterly just despaired. My whole world has been flipped upside down. May have even killed himself. Right? But because he could recall back, no, I know who this is, and I believe who this is, he was preserved. Now, why didn't Jesus just do this for everybody? Why didn't he gather everybody around, all the Israelites? Hey, guys, everybody come to Jerusalem next Passover, and I'll stand up on the parapet, and with all of you guys gathered at the below, I'll just ta-da and show you who I am. Man, wouldn't that have been nice? Well, we already talked about why. Those people hadn't come along to the point that the disciples had, the apostles had. They didn't have the faith that Peter had to be able to proclaim Jesus as Lord. If Jesus presented himself as the one true God, God from God, light from light, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father, the Son of Man from the book of Daniel, and he just showed himself to the people that way, none of them would have been able to have faith in him. He would have dominated their intellect, and there would have been room for no assent of faith. And Jesus wants us to have that assent of faith. It's that assent of faith, in part, by which we are saved. To have faith in Jesus. To know that we don't know exactly, because it hasn't been given to us in a perfectly laid out, indisputable, demonstrative way. But nevertheless, we know that it's true. We believe it, and that is our faith. So then how did we get to here? Right? We're balancing. Jesus is playing this balancing act between trying to reveal enough so that people can have faith in him, but not so much that people cannot have faith in him. We'll go back to Peter's book here. He says, so we ourselves heard the voice from heaven while we were with him on the holy mountain. Moreover, we possess the prophetic message that is altogether reliable. You would do well to be attentive to it as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. Jesus wants his apostles to be his bishops. He wants their successors to inherit that role, and their successors and their successors, because he loves the model of the shepherd. He wants there to be sheep to follow the shepherds that he sets up, to join them through that shepherding action to himself, to be one body with one head. And so he gives his apostles this unique experience to confirm in them what they already believe in faith. So that when they proclaim the gospel, they will have the utter absolute conviction that what they are teaching is true and altogether reliable. So that all of the people who have yet to believe in Jesus might, through their ministry, come to believe in him and express the same faith by which Peter, James, and John, and all the other apostles came to their salvation in Jesus Christ. And Jesus has worked that salvation for 2,000 years through the ministry of his church. And so while this moment of transfiguration is all about faith, it's all about the faith of a select few, the shepherds, so that they can faithfully deliver the message of Jesus to countless numbers and draw them into the sheepfold through the gate which is Jesus Christ. We are those living in this time. We are the ones benefiting from the revelation of Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, not because we saw Jesus transfigured before us, but because through the ministry of his apostles and their successors, we can see him here on this mountain, clothed in bread and wine, and be able to say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the body, blood, soul, and divinity of the one Jesus, raised from the dead, living forever, and inheriting a kingdom that will never pass away. And I believe in that. And it is in that we are united to Jesus through the ministry of his shepherds, through the benefit, the gift of grace that we receive through the sacraments in 2023. We live in a very modern age of expectation, comfort, luxury, wealth beyond an ancient person's wild imagination. We live 2,000 years removed from the moment that Jesus showed himself to be God, allowed himself to be crucified, after breaking bread and saying, "Take this, all of you, this is my body. I am the Lamb of God." 2,000 years from the time that he rose from the dead to the bewilderment of the Roman guards stationed to keep watch, and the incredulity of Peter and John, and the delight of Mary Magdalene. 2,000 years from the moment that the apostles were caught by the angels with their jaws slack, gaping up at the sky, when Jesus ascended to his Father. And yet we believe. You have seen, Thomas, and believe, but blessed rather are those who have not seen and yet believe. We live in an amazing age to be a Christian, because the miracles that Jesus did for Peter, James, and John are made available to us every day, but he preserves for us the gift for us to give to him, that invaluable act of faith that what has been proclaimed is altogether reliable, true, good, and beautiful.